My title is Turn of the Century French Suffragettes. And suffragette is a title that started in the British press as an insult, and that was taken on by people in the movement as a honor. So we're going to talk about two of them in particular. Our first one, whom we have been studying in my course, is Hubertine Auclair. Her dates are 1848 to 1914. And there she is. Her organization that we've been studying in my course is called Suffrage Femme. And she established it in the 1880s. There was a hiatus for a few years, and then she reorganized it again, and it was active right up to the time of her death, which you can see is when World War I broke out. I'm going to emphasize Brunsvik because that's how things work best for my course, but I needed to, for those of you that aren't in the course, I wanted to just say a few things that will be repetitive for my students, and they can add in, when we get to Q&A, some of their own responses. Hubertine Auclair was a strong individualist. She was schooled in a convent boarding school and had wanted to be a nun, but was refused by the order because they considered her, quotes, too crazy. Very strong-willed. By the time she gets to Paris in the 1870s, has one goal for her entire life. Basically, she doesn't really think about anything else except getting women the vote. She certainly leads the way and creates the situation that is going to lead to successful movements after the turn of the century, but goes through a number of, makes use of a number of different actions, including the tax revolt. She refuses to pay taxes because she doesn't get to vote. And just when they're going to sell all of her belongings, she pays the taxes, but gets a lot of publicity for that. That's what she, the kind of actions that she carried out. But we're going to go on to our second person. This is Cecile Brunsvik. Her dates, she's the next generation. Her dates are 1877 and 1946. Both of them are certainly part of the middle class, the bourgeoisie. Brunsvik is, Auclair marries, but her husband dies. We've just been studying that part of her life after just a couple of years, and spends the next 22 years as a widow. Brunsvik is married to a well-known professor of philosophy. She has 4 children. She has grandchildren. She, like a lot of people of her social background, is greatly involved with philanthropy, and many of the concerns that become important for the women's rights movement. And she quickly realizes that philanthropy is not going to completely solve her, opposed to solving the problems that she observes in the society in regard to women. And for that reason, gets involved with the movement for women's suffrage, a movement that, an organization that starts in 1909, and she becomes the president at one point, and then realizes also that she is not going to have any, she's not going to have enough influence unless she has some close contact with a political movement. And so she becomes very closely aligned, becomes a member of the Radical Party. You have the name radical. They were radicals back in the 1870s. They are sort of moderates these days, or in the 1920s and 30s, as compared to the socialists. And power goes back and forth between these two formations. Women in the suffragist movement criticize somewhat her political activity, but she decides to be involved politically, and it does have results because she, of all things, in 1936, when the Popular Front, the Front Populaire, comes to power, which is a government supported both by the moderate Radical Party and the Socialists under the leadership of Léon Blum. She becomes part of the cabinet. She is an undersecretary at a time when women still could not vote. And in 1936, of course, Hitler at this point is in power in Germany, and another sort of surprising fact here is that both Brunsvik and Léon Blum, the prime minister, are Jewish. And we're in 1936, and I'll have a few things to say about her experience during the occupation of France by the Nazis. But let's move on here. So this is the organization that she really gets in on the bottom at the very beginning, and very soon moves up into an important leadership position. This is the French Union for Women's Suffrage. And I just shared with you here a poster of, this is one of their meetings in the provinces, December 15th, 1913, so prior to World War I. Grand meeting, les femmes ont-elles droit au travail? Do women have work? So you see, this is these issues that are coming up where a consensus can be built, strangely enough, that is not present when you're talking about women's suffrage and women being given the right to vote. Okay, so she gets involved in all these social issues, and one of them is she almost single-handedly gets this, creates this school, École des surintendants d'usines et de services sociaux. And it's sometimes difficult, the translation can be difficult. I was sort of wondering about this. Basically, you might say surintendant might be a superintendent, but I see in reading some of the English texts that it gets translated as factory inspectors. So usine is a factory. So what she does is she creates a profession for women to go out and be observers in the factories regarding the conditions women are working under. And she also realizes that social work is something that is going to make a difference and needs to happen. And so that's included in the school, and the school still exists to this day and sees Brunsvik as the founding spirit and leader. This is what this is a factory from 1920. So it was very much needed. And it's interesting that she takes on this assignment, given that she has a rather comfortable life as the wife of a professor, intellectual, and a very enviable position in terms of her personal situation. She also becomes the director of a newspaper, La Francaise. You know that Francais is the masculine, and when you add an E and it gets pronounced Francaise, that would be the French woman as opposed to the French man. She doesn't, in the 20s and 30s, run for office, as some women tried to do even back in the 1880s, nor does she, is she very active politically. She's part of the party. She's a well-known figure, but her activism, a lot of it comes out of her writing and her editorship of this newspaper. And she, perhaps unlike Hubertine Auclair, is very much focused on creating as large a movement as possible. And so she wants to do nothing. She succeeds in getting Catholic women, Protestant women, socialists, a wide spectrum of women and some men to join the movement for suffrage. And that pays off because when we get to the 1930s and the formation of the Popular Front, she's not seen as being someone who's going to be obstructive and a difficulty in a cabinet. And in fact, the suffragists are quite successful in the 20s and 30s. They keep getting women's vote passed by the Chamber of Deputies, and then the Senate votes it down. And so one thing that Brunsvik and others try to do is influence senators, but it's a difficult task. So let us move on then, jump to 1936 and the Front Populaire. And the gentleman to your right is Léon Blum. And you see this is from the suffragist newspaper, La Francaise, and it says, "Trois femmes font partie du gouvernement." And to the right here, you have Cecile Brunsvik. This is a really strange situation, don't you think? And you have to give it to Blum. He and the other men in the government did not envision these three women having a lot of say in policy, but he did take the initiative to include them in the government. And Brunsvik, in particular, was not at all willing to just be a figurehead, and really had, the government fell after 1 year, but she had a lot of effect in all sorts of areas. So here are the three women. You've got their names up here. Irène Joliot-Curie, Suzanne Lacour, and Cecile Brunsvik. And France put out a nice stamp at one point commemorating the Front Populaire and les premières femmes au gouvernement, the first women in government. So, let's see. But it's 1936, and the Popular Front government falls, and in 1940, the Nazis invade and occupy France. Brunsvik finds herself in the south of France. France gets divided at the time, in the first 2 years of the German occupation, into two areas, what's called the occupied zone and the free zone. The free zone is governed by a collaborating government under Marshal Pétain, and is somewhat more hospitable to Jewish people, in particular French citizens who are Jewish. On the other hand, the occupied section, which includes Paris, is forbidden. The Brunsviks cannot return to Paris. And they have a very nice house in the 16th arrondissement. Perhaps know that's, if you know Paris, it's one of the nicest neighborhoods, big house. And their place is sacked by the Nazis while they are away. And the collaborating government blames the defeat on degeneration of French society, and in particular blames the Popular Front government. And so Cecile Brunsvik is very much a target of the right-wing and collaborationist press. And let's see what's happening here. Here we go. Okay, so I've given you an example of some of the propaganda of what the anti-Semitic press was capable of. So the Palais Bourbon you have down at the bottom of your screen, and that is the meeting place for the Chamber of Deputies. And as I said, until 1946, there were brothels in Paris. And one of the constant issues being of concern for the women's rights movement through all these years was shutting down these brothels, which finally happened in 46. And one of the most famous ones in Paris was called Le Chabanais. And there you've got a book that came out telling its history. And in the anti-Semitic journal Le Pilori, they have a drawing which shows Brunsvik, Cecile Brunsvik, turning over the keys to the Chamber of Deputies and calling it the Palais Chabanais, as if, you know, the sort of typical right-wing and male criticism of the women's movement of saying that, you know, that they just want immorality in terms of sexual activity. So let us go on here. Let's see. I guess okay. But Eventually the free zone is taken over by the Nazis, and the entire country becomes an occupied zone. And at that time, the Brunsviks, they are in the south of France, in Aix-en-Provence, and consider leaving. But Léon Brunsvik, the husband, gets seriously ill, dies. Madame Brunsvik has to take on an alias and teaches literature in a girls' school in a very dangerous situation where many people were found out and executed or sent to camps, but she was not. So she was present on April 21st, 1944, for the voting of the French. So I'm going to come back where I can see all of you and you can see me. As usual, I've taken longer than I was planning, and I want to be sure to have questions and answers. So I'm just going to share one other final thing with you. I've translated a letter from Brunsvik at the time of voting, where it shows the kind of even-keeled, conscientious person she was, urging women not to vote just for women or be vindictive or revengeful, but simply to take on their roles as good citizens. And let me see if I can share that with you. So this is a letter from October 1944 that was eventually published in a feminist publication, Le Mouvement Féministe. The upcoming elections are going to take place under the sign of the resistance. That is to say, what everyone has in mind is lauding the French resistance to occupation and its success, much more so than that of parties or the two sexes. It is therefore necessary to collaborate with the men. It is now or never when we will be put on the same plane. In my opinion, our organizations will have chiefly the goal of propaganda and education, and they should pull back in favor of mixed entities, that is to say men and women, which alone are rational. And then she puts in caps, at this time, equality now exists. Women and men have shared the same dangers, the same worries. They often have even had the same uniform. And of course, she's speaking right at the moment of liberation here. And the men have not yet forgotten everything women are doing and have done. It is therefore a favorable moment to have mixed electoral slates, that is to say, men and women. We will learn later if political battles require the explicit intervention of our organizations. For the time being, I think the organizations should limit themselves to a modest role in order to secure their authority and rights for the future. And myself, I anticipate a mutual understanding of the constituted groups in the press, on the radio, less regarding the feminist agenda than concerning the obligation for women to integrate and take their place in civic society in order to get the nation back on its feet. So I could say much more, and I've left out significant elements of the story, but I've already been going at this way too long, and I'm looking forward to your having a discussion with you. I'll be glad to answer questions to the extent that I can. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That it's really nice kind of internationalizing our, what we've been learning this last, semester about suffrage here in the United States, but applying it to France. So if you'd like to ask Dr. Lutz questions, please just unmute yourself and ask the question. If you'd rather type it, feel free to type it in the chat box. you can send that to all of us. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can send it directly to me and I'll be glad to ask it. But yes, like Dr. Lutz said, we've set aside time for questions and answers. So please unmute yourself and let's have a discussion.
I wanted to thank Jay. This is so interesting to me because I realize how American my education is as far as knowing things like this. I mean, we learned about wars and dates of things, but I don't think we ever addressed issues. Human rights, civil rights, all of that. So I had no idea that French women could not vote until the year after I was born. I mean, that's that's incredible. But I've been thinking a lot about women's suffrage in the US and wish that I had asked my grandmother, who was born in the late 1800s, if she ever got involved in the suffrage movement or what she thought about it. I know my grandfather was heavily involved in politics, but I don't know about my grandmother that much as far as that aspect of her life. But this is really, really interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also, I would like to say that for me, this class that I've been taking with you has taught me a lot about how little recognition women get when it comes to big political events, because I had no clue who Hubertine Auclair was before I took your class and started reading about her. And same with, like Alice Guy Blanchet. I had no clue. I had never heard of her. And I just think that these two women have been such a big, they've played such a big role for French politics and big events that we should know more about them. I think nationwide and a lot of other countries should know about them. Especially in the film industry or when it comes to women's suffrage. I think that they should be credited more. But I'm very thankful to have you as a professor because you are very knowledgeable and you explain everything so detailed. And, I've just learned a lot from you.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, this is really interesting, and I was reminded of my project that I'm working on of the struggle for women's suffrage in Russia, which had a revolution involved with it. The socialists in France are pushing for a revolution, but it actually happened in Russia. But it actually got fulfilled in Russia/the Soviet Union, and Russian women got the right to vote in 1918, the year World War I ended. And they got a lot of rights in the 1920s, but those got backrolled due to Stalin. Like the Soviet Union the USSR was the first country to legalize abortion, but Stalin backrolled that. But yeah. And thank you, Dr. Lutz, for just being an amazing professor.
Thank you.
It kind of surprised me you were saying that it wasn't until 44, whereas it seems like with the French and like the French Revolution, like that would have just been, a given. Like when the French Revolution happened, of course, women got the right to vote and everybody's equal now. What was it about maybe suffrage in particular that the revolution didn't grant women the right to vote? And why was that too kind of radical for the revolution?
Well, there was a important revolutionary character, person at the time of the revolution in the 1790s, who did her best to get women included. Some of you probably know of her name, Olympe de Gouges. And the Théâtre du Rêve, the French company here in Atlanta, has done a production that included her along with Marie Antoinette and other French women of note. It is simply, well, it's not so much, what's really strange is that in this period in France, it seems like they could get a consensus on so many issues that you couldn't in other countries, but you came to the vote and no. So I bring up a different issue that I think is indicative that is worth thinking about, which is divorce. So the revolutionaries did not grant the vote, but divorce. It was Napoleon in 1803 who rescinded it. And the Napoleonic Code is responsible for much of the lack of the fact that women in the marriage and family situation do not have rights. And in this period that we're studying with my students, women are officially considered minors. That is to say, you could be 91. If you're a female, you had no more rights than somebody who had not become of age. But in this period, in the 1880s, we've talked in my class about a Republican republic. You finally get a government that is putting in place what you would expect a republic to do, which was not the case in the 1870s because it was run by royalists who taken things over. It's all fairly complicated, but I mention it because in 1885, divorce is granted again to women, so that, you know, you've got these male legislators willing to vote for divorce, but, you know, it takes like 70 years to get the vote. It's just, it's curious. And I think, I didn't mention this, I should have mentioned this when I was giving the introduction. I think part of it, as you might well expect, is quite simply self-interest of politicians. You know, are these people going to vote for us, or are they going to vote us out of office?
Yeah, that pointed to what you were saying with the radicals not wanting to vote for it because they didn't, you know, they thought that they were going to vote for the conservatives. And the conservatives probably thought the women were going to vote for the, you know, leftists. So interesting.
And you've got someone, perhaps, now for instance, I'm just like my students. I had never heard of Hubertine Auclair. I had never heard of Cecile Brunsvik. I had never heard of Alice Guy Blaché. I'd seen the New York Times did a really interesting thing recently of obituaries for people who died a long time ago and deserved a major obituary when they died and didn't get one. And Alice Guy Blaché is one of them, the film director that we're studying. And I, you know, this is my area of expertise, so I know the period quite well, and so it's really. But when I started from that question of, well, what was happening in 1919 with women's suffrage in France, these two names in my research kept coming up, Auclair and Brunsvik. But on the other hand, there is a woman who is very well known, that if you know French history at all, people do know of her. Some of you may have heard of Louise Michel. She was sent to New Caledonia after participating in the Commune. and was brought back when Republic gave amnesty to the communards in 1880. But she was one of these far left socialists. I think they were mostly frightened, and not without reason. I mean, they could get voted out of office. I mean, the Royalists had won the election in February 1871. So it's not like now where, you know, it's not very likely that the Royalists are going to win an election in France. She was, and Hubertine Auclair, we learned in my class, had Louise Michel, who was off in New Caledonia, as something of a model, looking forward to meeting her, was part of a movement to help these political exiles, especially the women. And when they met, they had an enormous disagreement. Louise Michel said, you know, you are, you know, a reactionary bourgeoise, you know, this, you know, representative electoral democracy is just a sham. Go figure.
Dr. Lutz, I just wanted to throw out a quick thank you for such an informative talk. And I wanted to suggest, and I'm not being facetious here, but this goes in line with the student Rebecca's comment about why so many people don't know about this type of history. And I just want to say, we've all been binging a lot of television this past year. And I think that this is ripe territory for Netflix series. So Dr. Lutz, in your next career after you leave us, maybe it's something that you'd like to consult with. And I'm talking to the young students as well. I mean, narratives make, you know, history more prominent, right? Popular narratives. So if you're interested in making sure everybody knows, take it on, you know, pitch something and send it off.
Thank you. The idea. Thank you. Yeah. It is. It's. I think my students can, of course, speak for themselves, but I think we're all really caught up in. And I would have, if we had more time, if I just felt I couldn't do justice to both of them, to do both Auclair and Brunsvik. So I just chose to. But that's why I did this lecture on Brunsvik. So what I'm hoping is that my students then can connect the two of them and see what, have some idea of what happened once we go beyond Auclair, who passes away in 1914, because the obvious question sort of is, well, why is it taking so long? So.
Yeah,
Well,
I think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I think that this is one of the topics that we've seen, you know, in Auclair's book, that has been such a big like event, and also the fact that she was fighting for the right of like divorce, or just, you know, like women in general playing a role in politics, and, you know, like anything that men did. She was basically fighting for everything that they were doing for women to do, you know, like I don't think that women were given, you know, like even the minimal rights to do such things, like, you know, that we consider now common and very logic, but we as like young people don't really take the time to understand how it came about to be so common, or to, you know, even happen. So I think that being able to see like the struggle that it was to achieve the right to vote, or the right to divorce, or anything like that, I think that that should be a part of something that everybody should know, you know, in my opinion.
You're exactly right. And that's the, Dr. Lutz has offered so many classes, throughout the years about topics like this that you're exactly right, aren't, in just the regular classes that students, have to take. These classes that are these special topics that are just fascinating, not just to the students, but, we have, 25 people that have come in today and listened and learned about this. So I want to thank Dr. Lutz again. This has just been absolutely amazing. And especially because Dr. Lutz, as a lot of us know, will be retiring and retiring from Oglethorpe, which that's going to leave a gap that I don't even want to think about. So, but I want to thank him again and thank you all today.
Eli,
Yes,
if
sir.
I could,
Of course.
I did see that Barbara Howell has included an interesting message here in the chat that I could perhaps respond to a little bit about
Yeah.
the organization, which is indeed interesting. And I was mentioning Eau Claire having Louise Michel as a model. She also had, as the French the suffragists at this point were very much looking to the United States and England. And we learned in my class that she was very interested and inspired by Susan B. Anthony. And Susan B. Anthony came to France in the 1880s, but she was much older than Eau Claire. What's kind of sad, at least from the perspective that we seem to be getting it as we've studied in our course, is that because the French suffragist movement was so minuscule and not really making much progress, they tended to be sort of discounted by a lot of the women in the other countries, as opposed to being interested in something really happening in France. And it seems the other thing that was a problem with Susan B. Anthony was that they couldn't speak each other's language. So they met, and Susan B. Anthony came to a meeting of the organization that Hubertine Eau Claire had. And there were probably like 20, 25 people there at most, so, and she couldn't tell what was going on. So I just thought of that, but thank you for the chat message. Thought I'd throw that in there.
Great. Well, perfect. Does anybody have any final questions? I should have asked that before I started summing it up. Does anybody have a final question for Dr. Lutz? And I want to thank you all again for attending tonight. This series has just been really engaging, and reminder that the next program will be Thursday, February 11th at 6 p.m. When Professor Jessica Handler will talk on their true stories using research to inform narrative. So again, I want to thank Dr. Lutz and thank you all for attending tonight.